For the last several years, I've been developing writing about artists, contemporary artist practice, and the lens I've been looking at is really kind of focusing on the fundamental questions that underlie an artist practice, particularly around questions of what motivates this artist and this person to do this work specifically. And as I've been developing that kind of writing over the last number of years, it's kind of pointed me more toward deeper philosophical questions. Sometimes and increasingly, the spiritual underpinnings of an artist's work. And some of these are a little lesser known, maybe, or lesser seen, less visible. And then sometimes, in some cases, they are much more of an active driving force. Many practices are engaged with questions of political frameworks that we live in, current contemporary questions around our social realities, the environments that we live in, as well as, let's say, formal considerations. And I think that there is such potential around giving equal weight and time to what the spiritual dimensions or the questions of the underlying questions around faith are that might form an important part of an artist's practice. It feels like these questions are taking on an increasing importance, and there's something very contemporary in a sense about artists reflecting what the rest of society is doing, which is seeking and asking questions and trying to understand, how did we get to this point in time? On an individual level, what is my purpose as an artist? What is my purpose and role in society? But then on a collective level, what are we doing and where are we going? And the interesting thing about that is those are the most fundamental questions of all time that people have asked for thousands of years. And there's something exciting about perhaps connecting and marrying these contemporary concerns and inquiries with some of the wisdom that we already have access to. And especially when we're talking about artists, their own interpretations might differ from what the prevailing ideas are. They might be creating hybrid ideas about it. And so this is an area that feels very ripe to find language and develop language for describing this. Like as I said before, in order to understand and articulate how artists are thinking about spirituality in their practices, I don't know that our tools of kind of general art writing, art criticism, or art theory are equipped enough to do that. There's such a vast range of traditions that to really write properly about them with depth and with care, it requires time and thoughtfulness with that tradition. I do often see, someone who is not maybe comfortable engaging with some of the ideas just because an artist is interested and engaged doesn't mean that an art writer necessarily feels equipped to discuss them. So that's on one level. But I do think that when we look at the relationship between spirituality and religion, they're very different things. I always think that when there's a large group of people who are practicing something, there's a desire and sometimes a need to organize those people. And this kind of gets into questions of the boundary between an individual practice and a communal one, an individual's understanding and a collective understanding or a community understanding. I'm interested in ideas around, for example, ritual. Artists who seek not just to represent a ritual per se or to experiment with the form of a ritual, but who in their work are being activated by it. And ideally, I think they're seeking to understand it not just within the frame of a religious institution, but a creative one, that this is their interpretation and it's a creative act. So there's, a desire, it's quite radical in a way to build upon or reinterpret or riff on ritual or practice that has been maybe codified or practiced in a certain way. That's what artists might be really well equipped to do and might help us understand the tradition differently. I have been trying to incorporate daily practice. So the term is sadhana. The way I understand it is it's a way of creating a kind of arc to a day. So it begins in the morning, and people do many things. They might have a period of meditation or a period of physical activity or exercise. I like to begin the day with meditation and a connection with my breath and my breathing, thinking about my body as a vessel for spirit, and throughout the day having touch points that I come back to, and then concluding the day in a similar way. In Islam, for example, the practice of prayer on these 5 separate occasions, the mind and the body are turned back to union or connection.
Kind of a realignment.
Yes.
At a certain point.
In the course of the day, yes, a realignment and a reconnection to then move on to the next part of the day. This residency has been a very exciting opportunity for me to practice a lot of the things that I had wanted to try and would like to incorporate into my sadhana or my broader practice. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to incorporate walking throughout my day, some contemplation in the beautiful garden here, as that kind of punctuates a day of sitting at my computer writing or reading. So there's wonderful resources that are afforded by this residency, a library which has given me access to really wide range of texts and publications that are in a really expanded way exploring art, music, poetry, all different types of creative practice, and a connection to a range of traditions. So inevitably something is able to associate with something I've been thinking about. And that's the great value of a residency, the structure that enables the free form and kind of flow of ideas that could not be planned or predetermined. Definitely a highlight for me has been the 2 other artists who are here, Norberto Roldan and Nugent Smith. Both of them working quite interdisciplinarily and coming from really different traditions, but it's been wonderful to spend time in their studios and understand their practices, understanding what they're making, what they're working on today, the big questions that underlie their work. I think something that's come up is the idea of art and spirituality being pretty inseparable and inherently interwoven for actually both of them in different ways. Right. And so that's an interesting concern when we think about how can writing about art and about artists' work also weave these ideas together and not necessarily treat them as distinct and separate entities. Arguably, art has never been separate from spirituality, but a platform like FSA helps us understand that they have, in a sense, been separated from each other. And I think that's been the product of many things. I think in the field of art, we have absolutely internalized this, that an intellectual, a research-oriented, and a very specific type of research-oriented way of looking at art, understanding expertise, understanding single authorship of an artist, all of those things are wrapped up in understanding art in a very specific, pretty siloed off way, very distinct from how it has often and always lived. And so I feel FSA is providing a really open frame to fortify discourse between spirituality and art, and to really kind of uphold it as a place that's rich and not concretized, that it's a place that deserves to be continued to be developed. I have to say, as a researcher and curator who has for many years organized artist residencies for artists, I really see how valuable this experience is, just having the proximity to an artist in this way. These artists are so practiced and experienced in organizing their day. It's like a beautiful choreography. And so for me to observe the way they handle their day and their week has been a huge learning for me and very inspiring to sort of continue to think of all of my work as a practice. I don't identify as an artist, but I absolutely feel I'm cultivating and evolving a practice of my own. But one thing I was able to do here, which I've wanted to try for a while, is an Ayurvedic practice. It's called Shatta Dauta Grita, and it translates, it's a Sanskrit phrase that translates to 100 times washed ghee. So ghee is a clarified butter that's used in cooking in a lot of parts of South Asia and beyond. But for a while I've wanted to just try this practice, which is a process of quote unquote washing ghee. So it is mixed with water, and ideally with a copper vessel called a lota, you stir the ghee with a fresh pour of water. And you stir it about 20 times, 10 times in each direction, and then you dump out the water. And then you add another pour of water. Stir it 10 times in one direction, 10 times in the other direction, pour out the water. So once you do this, ideally it's 100 times, that ghee really does transform. It changes color and consistency completely. So it changes from, what looks kind of like a thick oil that you would cook with, it turns into this fluffy white body cream, essentially. And it's known to be like a miracle skin treatment. So it relates to the Ayurvedic, belief of plant medicine, essentially. So the process too of a little bit of alchemy and transforming from one state to another, that was also part of my
Right.
experiment. And we had a question if, as a result of this, have we changed? We'll have to see about
Thank you
that.
for sharing that with us and for this conversation as well. And it's been just such a delight having you here.
Thank you, Tyler.